All right, is anybody ready for presidential karaoke? Couldn't get Taylor Swift, but I think Arnold was pretty good. I guess Dave and I could have done a karaoke duet up here. He could sing bass. So thank you very much, David, for that very kind introduction. My mother may be the only person who would have believed that. Marion, my wonderful wife, would tell you that she's been a key to my success. My son Jeffrey, who's doing his PhD at MIT, he'd probably come up with some fancy modeling equation about hypersonic flow of gases, plasma through scramjets, but he'd just tell you, just divide by 2. And as far as Max, my younger son, who's an aspiring veterinarian surgeon at Cornell, Dave, he'd probably give you a good pat and a rub, and like all veterinarians are so good at. And thank you to my mentors. As you saw there, many of them are past presidents, and they were fantastic coaches for me, not only teaching me operative procedures, but leadership skills, and putting me in positions that allowed me to grow. So I'm very grateful to them. If I have a glimmer of light in comparison to their lighthouses, like sharp Fresnel screens on lighthouses that guided us through turbulent waters and times to safe harbors, then I bet it'd be an honor, and it's very humbling to follow in the steps of such great leaders. I also want to thank my team who's here, many from our operating room, surgeons, anesthesiologists, and thank you for joining us. You make it a joy to come to work every day, and wouldn't be possible without you. I'm much more dependent on you than you are ever on me. I'd like to also thank the sponsors, especially the sponsors that have been particularly generous, Abbott, AstraZeneca, Edwards, and Medtronic. And then the speakers that you have heard over the last couple of days who gave of their personal time to come and talk to you. Did you hear the questions and the music? All right, so why, how, what, and so what? So that will be what I'll be speaking around. So why are you here? Dave Adams, I'm seeing you in front there. I'm going to ask you. Dave? Yeah. All right, thank you. Any other reasons? So why, obviously, is somewhat of an existential question. Why are you here? But as I think you heard, particularly Peter Ray's talk, you need to sort out your purpose in life, what your goals are going to be in life, and that is part of the why. Why are you here? Some of you may be here for other reasons. Any other reasons? Any front row, back row? So what are the 3 words for AATS? All right, so Rose is pointing them out. Scholarship, vision, and leadership. So I hope many of you got an opportunity to present your papers and academically grow. We had some 950 presentations. And so how many of you had presentations at this meeting? Just put up your hands. That's great, wonderful, super. How about becoming a better surgeon? So we tried to put into this meeting a number of videos, courses about how to become a better surgeon, particularly for the younger people. Just remember that as surgeons, you try to perfect the operations, be compassionate and empathetic with your patients, continually get better at what you do, become more and more efficient. Tyrone David mentioned yesterday his father-in-law to be filmed them operating and said, why did you put your finger around the aorta for infrarenal aneurysm 8 times? You need to become more efficient. And then as you perfect your technique and grow, you also must remember your patient's life is at risk. There's nothing safe about being on a heart-lung machine or having aorta cross-clamped or ischemic time on the lung. So you're always trying to do better. I was trying to think of a sports analogy that would work for this. And I think what it is multi-hull sailing and Formula One racing. I used to work as a physician on Formula One races when I was much younger. Now, the process for you who are younger to learn operations, the racers, they are learning new tracks all the time. They're looking at the conditions. They will ride a bicycle or walk the track to see every little bump so they can take advantage of that. They'll read about the track, they'll watch videos about it, and then work on a simulator to try and hone their skills. And then you have the practice sessions, and you're always trying to get better, getting more efficient at what you do. Of course, the big difference is your life is at risk instead of the patient's life. And so you're always trying to get better, and afterwards always debrief. You heard that yesterday. When you're going to plan an operation, think through the steps of the operation, mentally image it just like the racing car drivers, and then debrief at the end of it. I still go through mental imaging of operations like cabbages, reimplantations, aortic arch operations, just to try and make it go smoothly. The other thing I'd like to just make a comment on, particularly for those of you who are younger and learning in your careers, the critical thing is for heart surgery is myocardial protection. I was once sitting next to Gerald Buckberg on a bus ride, and I said, Dr. Buckberg, you probably have saved more people from undergoing cardiac surgery than anybody else in the world. So the key things from my point of view of cardioplegia is make sure you always give a great dose initially. I measure the temperature with a temperature probe, get it down to at least below 15 degrees, longer operations below 10. Repeat it every 15 to 20 minutes. And also, when you're running retrograde, don't do that for longer than 30, at most 45 minutes. That means your operation becomes a technical exercise, and you can safely cross-clamp the aorta up to 5 hours or more and have a successful outcome for your patients, which ultimately is all what we were trying to strive for. Any other reasons you may be here? We talked about the 3. Leadership. So I see our CEO at the front here, Mr. David Bobbitt. So what are the keys to leadership, David?
Establish a shared vision and shared goals. Put your people first, the institution second, and yourself last. Be honest, be driven, and be caring.
Well, there's a long, great list. Vision, putting your team first, great summary there. So why is it that when it comes to leadership, there isn't a book on leadership? You know, it's not like when you were doing general surgery, you use Schwartz, and when you did cardiothoracic surgery, Sabiston or Kirkland. There isn't a book. In fact, if you look up on Google and search leadership, there's 75,000 books available. So clearly we as humans haven't figured out leadership, I would argue. And why is that? So Patrick mentioned a bit the anthropology lessons we had from Philip Tobias. And the problem is that as humans, maybe starting off as bipeds about 3.2 million years ago, we didn't need leadership. It's a modern invention about 10,000 years ago. When we were strolling the countryside, the veldt, the savanna, the steppes, we were looking for food. We were looking what was growing, whether there were nuts or whatever, and we would gather the food we needed. It was only when, about 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, that we settled down with agriculture, tamed aurochs, and started having cattle, sheep, etc., that we then became possessive about land. This is my land, this is not your land, get off my land, these are the rules. And so eventually we had to develop systems to manage a population that was stationary and not moving to the extent that it had historically, and there was great freedom. And so hunter-gatherer foragers, usually the group consisted of about 25 people. Once you started getting the aggregation of pastoralists and farmers, then you had bigger populations, and eventually it developed into royalty, kings and queens, trying to oversee the population. The Vikings, of course, they would not be ruled by anybody, and so they developed a democratic process of dealing with issues, and then really only persisted in Iceland. Even the Vikings, when they started choosing kings and queens, that ended the Scandinavian epoch when they took over. In 1215, King John in England had to deal with the revolt of his population against him. And the Archbishop of Canterbury then worked with him and the population and drew up the Magna Carta, the first of many documents. Similarly, the French overthrew their royal family, and based on much of the writing of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and also influence for the American Constitution, John Locke and liberal ideas, here in the United States, we came up with a constitution based on that idea of republics, and especially here in the United States, south of the border, the Constitution drew up the liberal freedom of individuals. And let me just say parenthetically, as we talk about working in teams, that is kind of a contradistinction of what our constitutions say in the United States. So as you know, when the founding fathers decided about who we're going to have to lead, they wanted to make George Washington the new king. He turned down that invitation, and wisely so. He served only one period as president. So now there was a political system of leadership. And then with the Industrial Revolution, you needed business leaders. And so you had the evolution of business leaders and all the challenges they had in evolving. And as you know, the literature is full now of ideas on business leadership. But what about in healthcare? Healthcare is now a business in the United States. You heard some of the challenges that Guy David told us about. It may not be for profit, but you have to make some profit to pay the salaries of physicians, nurses, everybody working in hospitals, and keep the infrastructure running. By 2030, healthcare in the United States will be a $7 trillion industry. That's bigger than the GDP of Germany. It's only third to China. Last year, 2023, the payers, commercial, Medicaid, Medicare, spent $1 trillion on paying for healthcare in the United States. So going forwards, we need strong leadership in healthcare. And I would argue that you in this audience are the future of healthcare in the United States. There are many reasons for that, and we'll come to some of those. So what are the keys to being a leader? So early on, when I was much younger, you saw one of the photographs there. Our principal, president, decided that we needed to embark on a more progressive education at Treverton College. We would determine our own curriculum, we'd have less tests, we'd do more projects, work in groups. The idea was the Oxbridge model, in other words, Oxford and Cambridge, of you study in tutorials and you have groups that work together and teach each other, interventions as they called it, Cambridge. Well, the question then was, how was this going to be done? And there was an election, and the faculty and the students then voted who would sort of lead this effort. And for better or for worse, I was elected to do that. Felt pretty good, but to use a colloquial term, I royally screwed up. I had no understanding of vision. David just mentioned that. I had no understanding of culture, the politics within the groups, the pushback for change, and I struggled. The second half of the year, I got better at it. Not so much because I became a better leader, but I was in a position of putting together rugby, cricket, and athletic teams, and that helped in stabilizing the situation for me. Since then, I've tried to study leaders. I've read a lot of biographies, autobiographies, a lot of books. My wife says I'm only allowed to have 60 books on the shelf in the library. I, of course, have Kindle, and I'm afraid to let the cat out of the bag, Marion. I have a whole lot in my office at work, too. And so here is a working theorem for you. It's a theorem. You have to be true to yourself in developing your own leadership style and develop your own axiom. So to me, great leadership is the ability, the courage to create a vision based on challenges and opportunities that leads to a reliable strategy, taking into account pervasive culture, and through integrity, trust, influence, initiatives, motivates your team towards a higher goal that has higher moral value and purpose. Let's work backwards through that. I mentioned purpose at the beginning. Especially in medicine, you have to have a purpose in life, understand what your values are, what you stand for, because all of you are going to get tested with challenges. You heard, if you listened the other day, about cost versus quality, access for patients. You have to sort that out. Now, being Viking, there was something that they used to navigate for called a solsten, which is a sunstone. And basically, you polarized the light looking at the sun. So you knew where the sun was, and then you could figure out the azimuth and navigate from that. And then they had lodestones, which were basically magnetic stones, to guide them in their journey. So you need to develop your moral compass. Now, if one looks at past successful great leaders, and let's include in that George Washington, Lincoln, Churchill, Mandela, people like that, Martin Luther King, they were driven by the mission and their high moral values of helping people or saving nations. Now, we as physicians, we fortunately have patients as our moral compass, taking care of them. The keys that we've worked through that are important for taking care of patients is, first of all, reliable and safe care for them. You have to provide access for them. You have to provide for their whole life, in other words, population health. You have to also think about the financials, so you've got to document everything in the medical record so the billers can code. You have to have a strong IT infrastructure. Roles are very important, so everybody must be working at the top of their license, not only for efficiency, but also for engagement, so engagement of your staff. And if there's one thing that correlates either negatively or poorly with outcomes for patients, it's the level of engagement of people. If they're not engaged in the care of their patients, they are not going to provide the same empathy and compassion for their patients. And then at the same time, you've got to deal with care paths. You heard a bit about that. In America, we're going to hear more and more about that. Then you have to continue to do research and education and be affordable. So working back to the next thing was goals. And you heard Barry Ridgway talk about OKRs and KPIs. Let me just summarize. The book by John Doerr is really excellent. The key points of his book are focus, alignment, commitment of your team, and performance. In the subsequent Harvard Business Review article, he called it facts. So he changed P to tracking performance, and then stretch goals, which came from Larry Page, to reach further than perhaps you can reach, always trying to make your things better. So when it comes to motivation, I think all of us struggle with motivation, both personally and our teams. I was sitting at a lunch. I'd just become a new junior attending, and Michael DeBakey's faculty, and Joe Caselli was with at the table too. And he turns to me and he says, "Lars, how do you motivate physicians in the United States?" Here I'm a junior guy. He's been at this for 50 years. He helped create Medicare and Medicaid together with the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. And he asked me this question. I was completely flabbergasted. I sort of stumbled over my words. And I said, well, I think in private practice, money is important. That's the way physicians get paid, but it's not everything. I think the other parts to that are, what I've noticed is physicians want to be respected. They need to be recognized for their achievements, their research, great care of their patients. Which gets back to what's your purpose? Your raison d'être, as the French say, your meaning to keep you going, and also the joy in your life, your joie de vivre. If you have those pretty well aligned, I think that's going to be key to motivating you to succeed. So what about teams? I asked Ed Salas to talk because he's really a master at understanding teams and has done a lot of research on that. I'd like to reorganize his C's a bit. So the conditions that you have to work under, the capabilities of the individuals you're thinking for your team, their cognitive ability, and their cooperation with each other. And then you have to coach them in communication and carrying out the mission. So those are some of the things as far as teams. Initiatives. I've noticed that people who have risen in leadership have been able and been prepared to take risks. They have courage. They expose themselves to vulnerability, to take on risk for initiatives. I was talking to one of the CEOs from one of our major companies who is supporting us the other night. We had dinner together. And he said he was elected because he took risks. He did things that nobody else had done or tried to do, and he also did a lot of mergers and acquisitions. So courage and exposing yourself to vulnerability. Now, you may fail, but you just need to pick yourself up and start again. That's true grit. That's resilience. You're always going to learn from your failures. There's always opportunity to learn. So that's initiatives. What about influence? So, as I said, in our DNA, as hunter-gatherer foragers, we never needed to lead. We never needed to gain influence. You had your family unit that you went around with. Well, it turns out that chimpanzees have been living in groups for 5-6 million years. And Jane Goodall and her team have studied that. And how do the leaders become leaders within chimpanzee, in a sense, jungle cred or street cred among chimpanzees? So it turns out there are three things that are important internally and three externally. So internally, they build alliances with the stars on the team, and they work together. But they also balance the superstars. They adjust. They make sure nobody overcomes the young and the weak. And so they take care of the young and the weak. They look after those, protect them, the disabled, the sick. Externally, they go out and find food. From a practical point of view, that means when you become a leader, you've got to find food for your team. In other words, philanthropy, to do research, education. You've got to go out and find beds, staff, get money for things you need. So that's a critical part of what you do. When your team gets threatened, you need to lead the charge and protect your team and take on what the challenges are. And thirdly, you build alliances with people outside your clan. So CEOs, politicians, community. So those are some aspects of influence. What about trust and integrity? These are critical parts of your leadership. Dwight Eisenhower said the most unquestionable important factor of leadership is integrity, especially in healthcare. Honesty with your colleagues, with your patients, the people around you. I read a Harvard Business Review article about a month ago, which is rather disturbing. In business, CEOs were asked, what's the most important factor in leadership? Some 20 years ago, number 2, integrity. Now it's slipped to number 6. I foresee more and more challenges with the way business leaders behave. 1/4 of them are fired every year. On top of that, I won't mention the university, But I sent some of, and I've sent a number of them, of my senior team to executive MBAs at a very well-known university. And one of the questions they were asked was, in negotiation, is it okay to lie? The conclusion of this course was, yes, you can lie. To me, the basics of any negotiation is building empathy with the person that you are negotiating with, trust, finding out what their goals are, and then you work towards those goals. And just parenthetically, when I had dinner with the CEO the other night, he volunteered that himself as far as the success of his mergers and acquisitions. Now, how do you put that together then as far as trust? So there's a formula from an attorney, Charles Green, and he says, trust is related to your reliability, in other words, keeping your word, integrity, your credibility, and your intimacy with your team. And it's inversely related to your self-absorption. I'm not mentioning many books, but Stephen Covey's book, that's Stephen M.R. Covey, which is the son of the famous senior author, Covey, is a worthwhile book to read on trust and how you gain it. It's called The Speed of Trust. So how are you going to live your life as a leader? Let me offer some suggestions. You heard them through some of the talks we've already had. I like to think about the silent generation, the World War II generation, and some of the things about them. They were honorable, honest, and humble. Externally, they were hardworking, they were humorous, and full of hope. Hope for the future. Let me remind you that every one of you here in cardiothoracic surgery, the greatest hope you are ever going to be involved with in creating for any human is taking care of patients. There's probably no profession that anybody is involved with that endangers so much hope in people as cardiothoracic surgery. Patients are scared, but you're there, stick with them, be compassionate with them, empathize with them, and go through it all with them because they've pinned all their hope on you. Another point about style of leadership is the Prime Minister many years ago, or Chanakya, he said, think about your people's welfare, happiness, and well-being. Be accessible to everybody. Be just, and don't prolong decisions. So what are the criteria that you may be chosen as a leader or as you look for leaders? We've touched on integrity, emotional intelligence, as it's called nowadays. I never had that when I had my first leadership job. Daniel Goleman's books are very good. The latest one, Optimal, I think is particularly good among his series. We talked about courage and opening yourself to vulnerability. I know Jack Welch perhaps doesn't rank as high as among CEOs nowadays. I was talking to somebody who worked under him a few days ago. But I think it's worthwhile starting off with 4 criteria he had for choosing leaders. One is they're energetic. To me, that means they're good at creating initiatives. They energize other people, in other words, motivate other people. They execute on the strategy, and they have the edge to make tough decisions. From my point of view, there are few things we need to add in medicine. empathize with your patient. You have to have endurance and stick with your patients and in the long term and be reliable. I'm in the stage of my career now where my patients are coming back 10, 20 years ago, sometimes 30 years after heart surgery, and I have to reoperate them. You've got to be there for them. You have to educate future generations, not only your trainees and residents, but your future leaders. When I look around North America, there are 15 programs at one time that were the best in the world. You can name them, many of you belong to them. But they're not what they used to be. Fortunately, many of them are coming back through new vibrant leadership and research. To me, the key is they stopped research, they stopped innovating, and didn't prepare for the future leaders. The other E is elan, or culture. You're going to set the culture for your team to try and get them to work well together and deliver for your patients. You need to be encouraging, and you need to be an enthusiastic cheerleader, whether that is a celebration of a paper, presentation, but also somebody's mourning or sick. You need to be there for your team members. So we've talked now about becoming a leader, why and how. Let's talk about what. What are you going to do? So you've just been made chair of your department. What are you going to do? The books say you've got 90 days. 90 days. That's the amount of time you have, political capital to deliver your leadership style, put in place the things you need to do. So from that point of view, when 9 years ago we were looking at HVTI and what we needed to do, we all got together. We asked everybody to give their ideas on what we were going to do for HVTI to grow, do better. That was our vision for the future, and the vision we came up was we're going to be the best, do better, have the best teams, best people, best place to work. To put that together from the point of view of organizational behavior and strategic thinking, we decided that we would use an adaptive model, which is actually developed in biological systems from the University of Vancouver, that you take pilot shots, and if that succeeds, then you grow and upscale everything you do. So just to summarize, we did this by what we called looking at challenges, opportunities, the actions we need to do, what our goals would be, and our timeline, and what the structural and support needs would be. Just happens that spells coags. And what we did was we decided to address the future. Our mantra was we have to change and innovate. As I said the other day, death and taxes are always with you personally, but professionally, budgets and change are always going to be with you. So you need to be prepared. When it comes to change, just think of it as an opportunity to grow, something interesting. It's so easy to say, well, we're doing things great, we can't get better. No, think about getting better and take hold of change as an opportunity. Secondly, preserve our great clinical practice, encourage research and education. And thirdly, untouchable outcomes. In other words, the best possible outcomes for our patients. And we monitor that. We've got 427 physicians as of April last year. We've got 44 cardiothoracic surgeons in our system. We know the results of all their outcomes. With my team, we review every death, and they know their results. Now, it's anonymous when it's posted, and you can go to our website and look up our results. But everybody's held accountable for their outcomes and results. So as part of COAGS, and I mentioned we get everybody involved, is to deal with culture. Because if you don't deal with the culture, you're likely not going to get through your strategy. The sort of word on the street in business is 70% of strategic efforts fail. If you're watching, Gary Alquist said 8% succeed, even worse. So you have to get everybody involved. You have to explain why you have to change, and then the steps that are going to be taken, and then hold people accountable for that. That was something that Fred Loop taught me. Now, how do you manage culture? Well, one of the challenges with culture, and I refer to the quote by Peter Drucker. He probably didn't say it, but it's a great quote. He said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," which highlights the importance of managing culture. There's a long list of things you need to look at to understand culture. When we do our consulting business, there are a lot of things we look at. Politics, environment, regulations, the socioeconomic situation, the CEO, IT, engagement of people, social structures, support, etc. But all of that helps you to work through to better understand culture. So now you've got your strategy rolled up, everything's going pretty well. Just remember your OKRs. So track how you're doing, make sure that everything's on pace. Barry Ridgway did a wonderful job of summarizing how to use OKRs in your practice. So the last question I had in the music was, so what? You're now a superstar, you're leading your program, everything looks great. The problem is 63% of physicians, according to a Mayo Clinic study, are unengaged. We're going to have a shortage of 510,000 nurses by 2030. There's some 4 million nurses in the United States, and only half of them are actually working, taking care of patients. So it's a huge challenge. And in your careers, you'll have setbacks, you'll have stress. There are obviously 4 things that are logical, and I think most people do. Take care of your body, your mind, your existential soul, and your emotional heart, your relationships. There was a study in JAMA in 2019 looking at survival and happiness. In other words, resistance to challenges. And it turns out the happier a person is, the better they survive. The ranking they used for figuring out the variables affecting survival were based on a psychological study by Riff and Keyes. And so here are the variables. They change over your life. They're different when you're younger, mid-career, and later in life. I'll take the ones from mid-career. So personal growth, both for yourself and for your team. Make sure they're growing. Autonomy of decision-making. This was particularly highlighted for me when we would try and do meetings early in the morning for a cardiologist. And some of them were struggling to make 7:30 morning meetings. Well, the obvious reason is many of them had to take care of their children. And so we had to be more flexible. We had to create more flexible programs and ways of scheduling their time. And so that was a key part that we introduced many years ago, giving them the ability to choose when they work, their autonomy. You need to master your craft. Malcolm Gladwell calculated it takes about 10,000 hours to become an expert. For internal medicine, it's calculated at 26,000 hours. From my point of view, to become a master cardiothoracic surgeon is probably about 40,000 hours. So mastering your craft is important. It's a great pleasure to that. Purpose is still very important. The efficiency of your life, your work. All of us have struggled with EMRs. Fortunately, ours has gotten a lot more efficient. Relationships are key. And when I say about relationships, what I tell the residents, it's not about your immediate professional career and what operations you do. Be involved in research, education, and then obviously outside work. Have other hobbies, have friends. Your family is key to keeping you and sustaining you and giving you the resilience. The last variable is self-acceptance. Now, with that, I'd throw in also an S for support. You heard Governor Schwarzenegger. If you listen to the Netflix series, I did as much research as I could on him. He was never satisfied with his body. As much as he exercised, he won all these 7 Mr. Universe and Olympia medals, he was never satisfied with his body. He was never happy with it. So self-acceptance is very important too. Just accept who you are, make you a lot happier. So how do you tie this all together? So we're going to switch pace. For those of you who have been hiding your cell phones and want to take some videos, this is 101 behavioral psychology and leadership and strategy. So here's the scenario. Here's some rats. They're all happy in their little area. But there's a problem. They don't have any food. Fortunately for them, there's a well-seasoned leader who understands vision, mission, values, all for one for all. Their purpose is survival. And he says, let's go through, he's heard about coags. Let's go through our coags. What are we going to do? We need to find food. We need to survive. Now, as you know, it's difficult to motivate people, and he's not having much success with motivating his team here. But being a great leader, he looks around, and lo and behold, he sees a silo of nuts up here. And so he says to his team, all right, we've done our coags, here's our opportunity. Our mission is going to be to go from here to up there. And I'm going to switch microphones. And we're going to build a bridge. So our tactics are build a bridge, make sure we've got the good supply chain in place, and we're going to build a bridge. Our OKRs are going to be so many steps per day so we don't starve to death. That's our KPIs, if you like. All's good. Nobody's moving. The nuts up here, they're not hungry enough. So, as I mentioned, Peter Drucker said, the problem is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So excuse me here while I put my gloves on. So as you see, I've got a bit of a cooler here, and I am just going to take this black mamba out of here. Now, you always hold the black mamba on either side of his cheek, okay? This one's about the size of one of the babies I had. Now, when you put your black mamba into a box, anybody belong to Peter, you throw it down. You don't want to get bitten by the black mamba. A friend of mine did. He had a terrible experience for it. So that's culture. And here we're going to get another fella out of here. Let's just pin him down. A bit of a cobra. He's a bit unhappy. He's known as disruptive innovation. So he's another fellow we're going to put in the box here. Now, we'll put these fellows in the system. So I said, whenever you're trying to motivate people and change, you have to make sure there's security. So if you're changing, you have to have security for your team. Well, as you see, there's not much happening here, so I'm just going to light a candle here, and we're going to add motivation underneath it here. Obviously, being in the cooler, they're poikilothermic, so they don't get around much. And we're going to add some more motivation here to the rats. As you see, I'm not a smoker, so I struggle to light Bics. There we go. That's organizational behavior and strategic thinking and tactics, OKRs 101. Well, I'm going to put them away. If you see a snake crawling out of here, just tell me. Or if you see a fire, because you probably get distracted by all of this. So I started off with music. And I jokingly said, Taylor Swift couldn't make it. She's being tortured at the moment. Have you seen about a week ago, new album, The Tortured Poets? So she's being tortured. So she couldn't make it. But my singing career is a very poor one. When I was about 10, I was in the school choir, and our teachers decided to put us all in our beautiful little white robes and, lapels and so on. And we had to sing at a concert, about an hour and a half away. Well, as 10-year-olds, you get hungry. And so we started loudly complaining about there was no food, we needed something to drink. So they decided to take us to a fast food place in our gowns and our robes before singing. And so these round tables, I was at altar, I somehow ended up among the sopranos. And there was a sort of grapefruit-sized dispenser with ketchup or tomato sauce. And everybody, the sopranos were trying to get it out, and it wasn't coming out. So being a bit bigger, I grabbed it and squeezed as hard as I could. Next thing, there's an explosion, ketchup flying everywhere. The teachers think somebody's been injured. I look like I'm bleeding out of my heart. And of course, it's a disaster from the point of view of the concert. So what they did was, they put the altars, who were mostly at the other tables, in the front. They put the sopranos in the back, and I was right at the back for causing trouble. My initiatives had failed, and I was in trouble. Well, I was kicked out of the choir pretty soon after that. And the Vienna Boys Choir, made famous, if you remember, in Sounds of Music, I think her name was Baroness Schrader. She refers to the Vienna Boys Choir. They came to sing and record with us, the choir. I wasn't in it. And I remember listening to them from the outside. They were angelic. They sang beautifully. But that's probably because a little devil was outside recovering from it. So you may have failures, you may have setbacks. You've got to recover from them and keep on going. I'm reminded of the presentation by Teddy Roosevelt to the Sorbonne in 2010. It is not the critic who counts, or the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or how the doer of deeds could have done better. Credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust, sweat, and blood, who continues to work at it. For without effort, there's no error or shortcoming. And he knows the great enthusiasm, the great pleasure of working and spending his life on a worthy cause. At best, at the end, he celebrates the enthusiasm of a great job done. At worst, if he fails having tried gallantly. So in the end, he knows he will not be counted with those who know neither victory nor defeat. Failure is going to happen, but you can recover from it. Keep on going. Try new initiatives. Michael de Baker used to say to the residents, and they were obviously a highly selective group of people, just as you are, excellent people. He said, excellence will always succeed. Just remember that. You will always succeed. Just remember your purpose in life, taking care of people and helping them. Which brings up the Rod Stewart song. When he was asked some advice, he said, give it all you got. Bring a light into your life. It's better to have loved than never loved at all. Nobody knows where your leadership path is going to take you. Providence may guide you in different ways. But get on that road again, like Willie Nelson, on the road again, to places you've never been before. Thank you very much. It's been a great honor to serve you, and thank you for coming to this meeting.